Nehru Tenassi, and Mr. Floyd Haynes. Good evening, gentlemen.
Good evening to you, Mr. Kevin Smith, and good evening to my co-host, Mr. Leonard Gildarie, as we welcome Mr. Paul Nehru Tennessee. I think that's the right pronunciation, but he will certainly correct us. But ladies and gentlemen, just before I open our discussion in room 592, let me take this pleasure in welcoming each and every one of you to this room 592 on this wonderful Friday evening. Room 592, where we unleash the truth. Ladies and gentlemen, some storms are ahead. Storms are brewing. And I mean so literally, not the Guyanese type of storm. And I would want to ask everybody to please keep a prayer in mind for our brothers and sisters in Trinidad and Barbados and the other Caribbean countries that seems to be in the danger path of a storm that is brewing there, a natural phenomenon. In Guyana, of course, we have the storm of the elections, 4 months long election storm, electrical, thunderstorm, typhoon, tornado, you call it, we are all of that. And ladies and gentlemen, that storm doesn't seem to be ending anytime soon. Tonight, we're supposed to be joined by Mr. Paul Tennessee and Mr. Floyd Haynes, but Mr. Floyd Haynes apologizes because he had some emergency matters came up and so he's unable to join us. We're also going to be joined very soon by Aussie Rogers out of the USA because just to spend 5 minutes with him to talk about some other matters there. But we are now ready to start our program. And Mr. Leonard Gildarie, how are you, sir? Have you recovered from that scene outside of the magistrate's court today, sir?
No, I saw politicians there. So the politicians have joined with GCOM now to bring the onslaught onto the Guyanese people. That was something very disturbing. I didn't expect that the politicians would have been doing that. But in addition to that, I take note of your refusal to send any snacks to the studio here in the absence of the taxis and so on. But that's okay. I think that's a conversation for another day. But good night to my dear friend, Mr. Paul Tennessee. He wouldn't know me, but as a little boy growing up back in the 80s and the 90s, he was down in the Grove area, and my mom and a gentleman by the name of Wendell George Prasad, as well as Angie, Auntie Angie used to call her. He did a lot of work down in that area there for women, upliftment of women. So I know Mr. Tennessee back in those days.
Great. And, certainly, Leonard, before I ask Mr. Tennessee for his opening comments, let me come right back at you and Kevin. Indeed, the taxis were not working, but you know what? If you don't get your share of the pine tarts and the cheese flaps and all of those things this evening and this weekend, then the better for your brother Yog. So who am I to argue with the absence? And Kevin, the footer bike just wouldn't work, sir. It's a long distance away. But let's get on with our discussion for tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome once again to Room 592. And I would like to introduce to you a very special gentleman who has been more Guyana than a lot of Guyanese presently, and who has been more Guyana than a lot of the persons who are fighting a guerrilla warfare, kind of warfare upon Guyana from overseas. They're sitting in certain basements and sitting in certain places overseas and fanning flames of racial hostility and political hostility in Guyana here. This gentleman has certainly been in the trenches, been in the forefront. When you talk about the 1980s, when you talk about all of those years, decades of stagnation, he has been there and seen through it, ladies and gentlemen. And, usually when you're talking about the 1964s through the 1980s, you would want to talk to some of the PPP persons, forgetting that there were other persons in the struggle. Hey, this gentleman has been part of that struggle while not being a part of the PPP camp. Mr. Paul Nehru Tennessee he is the director of the Roraima Institute. He is a professor of the University of D.C., Washington. He teaches U.S. foreign policy, global politics in an era of Trump and security and global institutions. Ladies and gentlemen, since 1964, he would have participated in that election as a secretary for the Balram Singh Roy Justice Party of 1964. So he is no kid on the block. And certainly when Leonard was a little boy, Mr. Paul Nehru, Tennessee would have been around as a big man, and he still remains a big man. And I don't mean big man
Okay.
in any derogatory word, but a big, respectable, very respectable person. Mr. Tennessee has also been the presidential candidate of the DLM party in 1985 and 1992 elections in Guyana. He was part of the foundation of the Patriotic Coalition for Democracy, for those of you who would remember the PCD in those days. And Mr. Paul Nehru, Tennessee, comes having subscribed to the authorship of many articles, many books, many programs that he would have participated in and authored, and that would have gone right around the world. And so I see Mr. Tony Bagwanda saying uncle or chacha as well too. So here we go. Mr. Paul Tennessee, sir, I would like to welcome you to this room 592. How are you, sir?
I'm in fine form, very fine form.
Great.
Preparing to teach online again. You know, with COVID, we all have become now online teachers, teaching from our bedrooms. It's very interesting, especially if you're an active social animal. It's a bit challenging.
Great.
I spend a lot of time now because I have a lot of materials, a lot of sources that I kept, and I'm now writing a history on a lot about Guyana now, particularly between 79 and 85 and 86 to 92. And my various experiences in Latin America and the Caribbean. The Roraima Institute has afforded me a small grant to write a series on the history of Guyana. So that has consumed me. Guyana has always been my first love, and I get more passionate about Guyana than perhaps anything else in life. So that way I survived COVID-19 through researching about Guyana, writing.
And if you don't mind, sir, tell us a little bit about the think tank and what you're doing there. Yes.
Well, first of all, two things. I'd like to apologize that my colleague who really wanted to be here, Floyd Haynes, could not be here. He's the president of the Institute, and he also teaches finance and business at the University of District of Columbia. Second, I'd like to mention, before I did the Institute, very quickly, one cannot go by without mentioning Wendell Passad and Angie. Angie was the head of our women's section of the DLM, and she was trained in St. Martin, Curacao, and Venezuela in courses. And Wendell was a born fighter. The guy was born, he just liked to oppose, and he was very courageous. And up to today, I spoke to somebody in Florida, a young teacher who's from Florida, and I had to go and hide in his home under the Hoyt regime because Hoyt had sent 200 policemen to arrest me in Lusignan, and I had to hide in his home. So Grove is a very special place, also because in the early days, my father had joined the independence struggle, and before he went to James Street, All Boys Town, to do business, where we had a shop, he used to live on Grove. He had a commercial school, and Ripu Daman Prasad was a young boy then. I'd worked with him at that commercial school. So I'd like to say that. Now, the Roraima Institute...
But sir, if you don't mind, just before, do you have another colleague joining us tonight?
No, I wasn't able to get one on short notice.
That's all right, that's all right. We saw somebody trying to join. Yeah.
So the Roraima Institute came about in this way. I met Floyd Haynes as a professor at the University of District of Columbia, and I'm well known in Washington, D.C. for convoking what we call local forums on many issues, local, national, and global. And we convoke people from the embassies, ambassadors, the State Department, the OAS, Inter-American Development Bank, PAHO, IMF, and World Bank. So a lot of these folks come to these events. And so when I met Floyd, I said, look, Guyana's independence is coming up. I'd like to hold a forum. And he said, I said, but you know what would be a good idea? It's 50 years. Let's hold a conference and convoke Guyanese across the United States and Canada. I have a convocation capacity, they will come. So he was able to put one of his people that work with him, a consultant, to work with me. And he and I co-chaired it, and 84 people turned up. So we did a very good conference on Guyana. We had presentations of papers and so forth. So then we said to ourselves, well, we listened to the Guyanese abroad on what should be done in Guyana. Now we have to go home and ask the Guyanese what they want. So I went home, and with a consultant of Mr. Haynes' company, I went to 5 regions, and we did listening interviews. This is one of our flagship that we are pushing, one of our products, flagship products. We believe that you have to listen to the people. I grew up like that. I grew up very much in the grassroots. I'm a very grassroots-oriented person. I was very involved in labor, locally, nationally, sub-regionally, regionally, hemispherically, and globally, in the leadership of labor movement, both at the world level and in Latin America and the Caribbean, from 21 years old. I've always had one foot in academia and one in the real world, an academic and a practitioner. I've always combined the two. Even when I was a student in Europe, in Latin America, I'm always with the student movement and studying at the same time. So I developed that. And so we went to the grassroots and we asked questions. 1 year after the APNU came to office, and we wrote it up and we presented it at Carolina. Since then, we've done a number of other things. We've been holding workshops at the university, at Tain, at hotels in Georgetown, on ethical and transformational leadership. So we feel very strongly about that is very much needed, not only in Guyana, but around the world. And also we worked on entrepreneurship, because Floyd believes he is a business person, a very successful businessman, and he would like to train cadres of entrepreneurs. We even collaborated with the University of Guyana. Both him and I became educational ambassadors when the former vice chancellor was there. We went to all the conferences they had. I presented a paper on a policy for the diaspora, and it was published in a book that UG published. So we've been trying to reconnect, and Floyd and I have been going very regularly to Guyana. I go every spring and every summer and do intensive work, because we're researching, we're a think tank, and we believe we should begin to get Guyanese to think beyond race and to think of policy, and beyond politics and to think about policy, but transformational policy. We have very strong views about Guyana. So we're very committed, and we are both thinking of transitioning to Guyana permanently.
Right,
in the very near future.
That would be great. In fact, yes, your experience and, your sage advice would be certainly good and useful to have in Guyana. Sir, undoubtedly, I want to bring you, right to what's happening today in Guyana. Undoubtedly, you would have kept tabs keenly on what is transpiring here in this lovely country of ours with its horrible so-called leaders. What would be Mr. Tennessee's thoughts of what is transpiring 2020 politics, especially when one would want to juxtaposition the 1980s Burnham era and now what is happening here, sir?
Well, you are aware, very much aware, that we have had very bad experiences with fraudulent elections and dictatorship. In 68, we had the first fraudulent election, 73, 78. We had a referendum in 78, which transformed the constitution we had into a constitution that enthroned a pharaoh, a Caesar, and gave him absolute powers over the people of Guyana. A constitution that empowered political parties to represent the people of Guyana, not representatives. They're not elected by the people. When I ran twice, I am the head of the list. I decide who goes to parliament if we won seats. It's not that the people are being elected, electing our representatives. So that participatory democracy was gone. The thing about colonialism, like everything else in human experience, it has the good, the bad, and the ugly. And somehow leadership was supposed to sift You know, in Guyana, we talk with the strainer. We were supposed to strain that constitution throughout the bad and the ugly and keep what was good about it. One of the things that was good about the constitution was local government. I grew up, my grandfather was an overseer, and my father, and he was a chairman of a village council, and my father was an overseer. I grew up learning the bylaws of the, and I believe in local government, but all that went through the window. Now, the elections were fraudulent, 1978 referendum, 1980 elections, and 85 was also fraudulent. So we have had a history where the PNC has developed tremendous expertise to rob elections, to organize fraudulent elections. There's no doubt about that. In 1985, we had a situation where the election was a product of electoral banditry, and we continued struggling. We founded the Patriotic Coalition for Democracy, and we got to 1990. I had a manifesto out. My posters was up. We were supposed to have the election in 1990, but there was a fraudulent list with over 200,000 people missing. By then, Mr. Carter had come to Guyana and begun to play an intermediary role. Now, we had united the opposition, which was a good thing. And secondly, we had for the first time, at the end of the Cold War, we had the Americans change their position through the leadership of Jimmy Carter from stopping any communist getting to political office in Guyana, getting any communist, i.e. Dr. Jager, coming to political office because of the Cold War. And there was an opening. Communism had collapsed, Berlin Wall had fell, so there was a new environment globally. There, Mr. Carter came. But Mr. Carter was doing work. I could recall the American ambassador called me in between 85 and 90. And she had advised me to get in touch with Mr. Carter because she thought that he was doing, and I had followed Carter's work around the world too. So when Mr. Carter came, he was able to negotiate with Mr. Hoyt some electoral changes. But Mr. Hoyt, by 1990, produced this fraudulent list. And secondly, by 1990 and 1991, he did not want to carry out the reforms. So he said, Mr. Carter insisted that he had to carry out the reforms and that he couldn't hold the elections. I boycotted the election. WPA did too. We did not go to the election because I said it's going to be another fraudulent election. And myself, Eliezer, who was an attorney at law, vice president, Claudius Landon, secretary of organization. I had a multiracial movement. I was very popular in Linden and with the young Indian people and so forth. So what happened was we burned the list and I launched a campaign since 84, nationally and globally. I went all over the world to campaign for verified fair election. I went to the Canadian Parliament in 1990. I met the subcommittee. I presented a paper to them to ask, and they did give support. I was at a dinner with Dr. Jager, Mike McCormick, myself, and the High Commissioner, where he said that it is because of my work that a top Canadian official was there to let it be known to Mr. Hoyt that unless the changes were carried out, they are going to do sanctions on aid. So we are back to 91, and a very interesting thing today, I was doing some quick research for your program. You wouldn't believe it. Do you know that Mr. Hoyt declared a state of emergency in 1991 and recalled the parliament in order that he claimed to deliver a clean list?
Yeah.
I know there's a lot of debate in Guyana now whether we'll have a state of emergency.
Yes, indeed.
But let us make note that that was done in function of carrying out reforms, not in function of consolidating dictatorship. They're two very different. So I will make a long story short. Here is my take on this thing. My take on this thing is that constitutionally, since March of last year, we were supposed to have an election based on the no confidence motion and so forth. We did not. So from April last year to the elections of March this year, if you do not have a sitting parliament, what do you have in a country? You have a dictatorship. You have a dictator. Come on. It's logical, isn't it?
Right.
The people are sovereign, but the people delegate that sovereignty to the parliament that they elect. There is no parliament. So we have had a dictatorship from then to now. Now the election was held, and let us have no illusions about it. All the people that observed that election, the opposition parties, and I know them, they're not PPP. They're independent of the PPP. They said the election was fraudulent. I was there in March. My colleague Floyd Haynes was an observer in the elections. Now these people are reputable. I myself went with the OAS in El Salvador as an observer in the election. I was an observer in Indonesia, the first time they moved from dictatorship to democracy. So my friends, how are you going to say that these reputable international organizations are telling a lie? Why would they tell a lie?
Right.
So it was evident before everybody, except the leadership of the PNC. Now, my personal view is that I do not believe that the PNC leadership does not know that they lost the election. I think they know they lost the election. But they're not being honest. The issue is that, and this thing is surreal, they know they lost the elections. They're not being honest because the issue that they are presenting is an issue of race. But they are not putting that on the table. What they really believe and what they are saying, and they are middle class, the leadership of the PNC is middle class, and they claim that they are speaking for all the African people in Guyana. And they are saying that they fear that if the PPP comes to office, even though they win the elections, and they know that, is that there will be what you call Indian domination. They have presented to the African people a situation that is almost existential. They are telling the African people their very lives are being threatened. That during one of the PPP administrations, about 500 young Africans were killed. This is a fact. When I go to do listening interviews, I speak to people in the PNC and the PPP and the people in the grassroots and people of other parties. So I have information that they have told me that is what they're thinking. Now, the problem is that this is not new in the PNC. Burnham had developed an ethnic ideology, ethnic nationalism. There's a guy named Daly had written a book from the Republic to cooperativism. And it was a victim concept. David Hines also has written about that African people have a right to rule Guyana because they suffered more under slavery. Ignoring Amerindian were there before and ignoring that Indians were indentured and Portuguese and Chinese and so forth. And ignoring the fact that none of the ethnic groups in Guyana are responsible for slavery. That was a white man's burden. Why are you putting it on other people? That was done by the Dutch. That was done by the English. So this victim concept, and I tell you, I have a speech by Burnham's wife, Viola Burnham, who became a vice president to the WRSM. And she said very clearly, the Amerindians used to catch runaway slaves. The Indians came and took away the African jobs on the plantation, and the Portuguese had shops where they used to exploit the African. Come on. That's an oversimplicity of Guyanese history. But that is what they're telling. It's existential, and therefore they are saying that Afro-Guyanese under the PPP are running all these risks. And this is what they're presenting. So the question is marginalization, discrimination. Now, why don't they accept or be honest and say, well, look, we lost the election, but we are not going to hand over power because this is unfair. If they do that, then you could begin to talk. You could begin to say, let's discuss it. Mm-hmm. And if the newly elected president is elected, he will have a responsibility. People like myself will say to him, we have to talk. All the international community will say to the new government, you have to talk. But you cannot talk if you don't put the issues. Let's say that I were to become by some, I met Mr. Granger twice. I wouldn't mind meeting with him to discuss how they could find a solution to this problem. But the thing is this, if I put the PPP in a room and the PNC in a room to discuss a way out of this situation, the PPP will say, look, we have extraordinary evidence, we won the election. And the PNC will say, we have a man called Mr. Mingo and another one called Lewinfield, who, like mandrakes and magicians, have produced numbers that say we won. How do we begin to negotiate? There will be no negotiations there because we are not dealing with the real issue. I think that the concerns, if they are genuine, now we have another issue that has arisen that has nothing to do with this historical concern about the PNC as a minority in Guyana. And the PNC has to remember that. They are not a majority if they claim that their supporters are only Afro-Guyanese. That means they are a minority. And you cannot, you know, on public meetings, I was very honest. That's why I got support in Linden and all about the place. I was very honest about the race question. I used to ask publicly, how would you feel if you belong to a majority ethnic group and a minority control the army and the police? Now, what is the Indian fear? The Indian also have fears. They are afraid that if the PNC rule, they'll go back to the days of the 80s, where crime, they believe that the state does not do sufficiently for crime. That's one, and they are victims. The other problem, they believe they'll be discriminated against. They also believe they'll be marginalized. So they also have their own fears. Now, there is the myth that Indians are rich. That's not true. There is an Indian middle class that has been successful. There's an Afro middle class been very successful. Tell me, are the Afro-Guyanese middle class successful in the military, in the police, in the civil service? As lawyers, we have some of the most brilliant lawyers and judges. Look, all the cases. So we happen to have a division of labor that we have inherited from colonial structures, where Afro-Guyanese were pushed in a situation where they had to go in the urban areas. They educated themselves before anybody else. They were in the vanguard of education. And they went into the areas rather than business. Now, this could be corrected. We could work very hard to ensure in Regent Street that for every 2 Indo business or 1 Indo business, there's an Afro business. You could make loans available. You could make entrepreneur skills available. There are things that could be done. So I don't believe that we should destroy Guyana. Now, here's what's happening. The other issue that has appeared here is the looming possibilities of oil wealth. You know, I put a lot of students, nearly 100 of my students, over a couple of semesters, to ask one question. How have the people in country X benefited from the oil revenues of various countries? My brother, in the global south, there ain't one single country where the poor people benefit.
Right. But Mr. Tennessee,
so oil is another problem.
Yes. Before we go to the oil discussion, very interesting, and I must say, your description of the race issue, for example, is certainly a dimension that we need to explore further. Sir, the PNC, throughout its history, has always put in the forefront a handful of Indo-Guyanese without appreciating a wider racial problem. The PPP has also always put forward a handful of Afro-Guyanese. Both of these parties seem, from a perspective, from a platform, they seem to be thinking that, okay, we are showing a balance of faces, which means we should be okay. But obviously, sir, it is not addressing the core problem of the word you use, that there are, one time or another, there are persons who are going to feel tremendous degrees of insecurity. Today, what we have is that Granger and his team would have engineered a whole slew of racial insecurity. They are drawing, to use your words, sir, they would have been drawing a fear of a PPP return to power without addressing the fact that they did nothing for their 5 years in government. They did nothing, can promise nothing, but says that whoever else will take our place is worth nothing. How do we start to address such issues, sir?
Okay, I have thought about it a lot over the years, and what you're talking about is what you call symbolic politics.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and we all are aware of that. You don't need to be a rocket scientist to know that game is being played. There are a couple of ways in which we have to deal with that. One is that we have to accept that Guyana's democracy, the democracy of Guyana, and the quest for universal freedom and rights of our people through conquest, slavery, indentureship, 20th century colony, has been sacrificed on the altar of racial insecurity currently and in the past on the altar of anti-communism. Those are two historical facts. Now, as you said, how do we address it? Number one, there has to be a structural transformation of the individual political parties. That's one. That is if you're depending on the PPP and the PNC to address this problem. I would like to see one day an Afro-Guyanese become the presidential candidate.
Right,
PPP,
right.
and an Indo-Guyanese become the presidential candidate of the PNC. But I would say also that there's another alternative. You could form another political party and oppose both. But from my experience, you can't do it 6 weeks before the elections. And you have to do hard work in the grassroots. And you have to fight. You have to fight for the people. You know, I'm documenting now everything I did from 82 to 92. And almost every week, there was an issue we took up and we fought for. I remember when I was leaving Guyana after 92 and decided to leave after we obtained a free and fair election. I was going through the country to say goodbye to some of my colleagues and grassroots people. And a guy might say, Palbai, why you go away for by who attack for Abi? You know, these opposition parties have to talk for the people. They have to be there and they have to be present. So that's a third process. The other thing is the Constitution.
Right.
We definitely have to transform the Constitution.
Sure.
Yeah.
Should a constitution, going back to what you said about business,
yeah,
should a constitution be created or should a constitution be changed to accommodate racial thinking or to accommodate a race? Because it will never stop. It's another vicious cycle we are going to get to. But my other side to the same question is as follows. In all of this politicking of the incumbent, that if the PPP comes into power, you are going to be you're going to be insecure, you're going to be in danger. With all of that, sir, the fact is that Indo-Guyanese votes alone would not have given the PPP a majority.
Correct.
And Afro-Guyanese votes alone would not have given or cannot ever give the PNC a majority.
Correct.
And these are the facts that they're hiding from the population.
Well, as I told you, the PNC knows, the leadership knows the reality. But it's surreal. They don't want to accept it because they don't want to put to the agenda. And as you said, they were there for 4 years, 5 years. What have they done in terms of this? If this was a priority for them. So they're very confusing. And this is the difficulty that they have. But when I speak of the Constitution, I think I wasn't saying that you have a Constitution that decides who's going to be private sector, this and that and the other. I am saying that you have a Constitution that embodies racial justice, social justice, and deals with the question of equality. And then we have to operationalize that Constitution.
But doesn't that have its own problem? Look, you can have all the laws in the world. Guyana probably has the most secure election laws and election policies and procedures. Yet, here we are. There's no other country, I think, in the world that might have all of these checks and balances. Sir, the truth is you can have whatever laws possible. If persons, if Granger is going to show, I am not going to follow the law, I am not going to follow the Constitution, where do we go then?
Well, you are taking me right back to my early days in Oxford studying the philosophers. Both Rousseau, Locke, and everybody start talking about the nature of human being. Were we born good or bad? And how do you construct a society based on some conception of whether people are good or bad? I am saying that the Constitution is important because you could operationalize a Constitution. Let me give you an example. I have a friend leading a think tank in Washington, D.C. He's a prominent Muslim Indian leader in India. He took the Constitution of India and operationalized it and looked at every right that a Muslim can have in that country. We need a lot of work. We also need, look, this is not a job of where you have a one size fit all, or you go and get one aspirin in the pharmacy and it's going to solve the headache of racism. We have to confront this thing in the grassroots, at the level of the community. We have to confront it in the schools. We have to re-educate the young people from kindergarten. You know, there are a lot of people in Guyana who don't know the national anthem. There are a lot of people who don't know the basics of our country. So you have to re-educate people to have a nationalist consciousness. That's the other thing, that we have lost a sense of very strong patriotism. And I'm making a distinction between nationalism and patriotism. Nationalism is related to the nation state. Patriotism is the love of the land. As I would say, Guyana is my first love, is the reason for being, and that kind of thing. That's patriotism, where you would go and give your life for what you believe in, for your country to defend it. So the thing is, because we got sidetracked with the ideological issues in Guyana, whether capitalism or socialism, Marxism or this, our leadership distracted us. And then the race issue distracted us. And we did not get to address, like other countries, like what America does every day. They drum it in their people's head. Man, they are very nationalistic and patriotic, and every day you got this drum in your head, right? And we are a small nation state, and we have not been through that experience. But the Constitution is very important. The leadership is important. Now, I agree with you. And that's why in the Rhymic Institute, we speak about ethical and transformational leadership. Because, once at the UN, I used to represent labor there for about 8 years at the United Nations. I gave a speech. Vision without implementation is hallucination. It's hallucination. So I could pronounce a vision, you can, the leaders can. But they have to walk the walk and not just talk the talk.
Right.
And who will do that? Who will hold their feet to the fire? The people, the grassroots, the young people. The young people will do that. Young people are very powerful. Look at all revolutions in the world. Young people are in the vanguard. Look at America today. I went out there with them in Washington, D.C. to observe those women. They're white, they're black, they're brown, they're young. There are some older people there, but they're young, right? And they are fighting. In the early days, when I was in Europe, 2 years after the student revolution of France, it's young people on the barricades. In Caracas, when I went to study in 1969, and they had guerrilla fighters in the mountain, it was young people that were fighting. So our future, our life, and the future of Guyana must be centered fundamentally around the young people. We have to empower them. We have to educate them. We have to orient. I said it in a previous program. In doing the listening interviews, one young person told me they're praying for the baby boomers in Guyana to die because they have old ideas. They take up all the jobs. They're not even satisfied with one woman. They want to have 6 women. They want to have 6 cars. They're taking up everything, and they're not leaving space for young people. They're not giving us a chance. We need intergenerational dialogue. We need bridges between the generations, so we could pass on knowledge from one generation to the other. Look, I believe in young people. Young people have ideas. They have brand new ideas. You won't believe how they are competent and capable. I work with them a lot and work with them in Guyana. My movement, they used to call us a youth movement. But they had no idea about these young people. And their minds are like a slate. You could write on it. So if you spend time educating them, so there is hope for Guyana in that regard. But however, we are in a situation, my friend, where we have to decide what is it that is currently imperant in Guyana. Because if you make a diagnosis that is incorrect, you will make a prescription that is incorrect.
Of course.
My view is that what we have in Guyana is a dictatorship right now, and we should call it that. My view is that Mr. Granger has made it pellucidly clear from what I have read that even if the chair of the election commission declare a winner based on the recount, he will not accept. So what he's saying, when that moment comes and he takes that decision, he will be working to consolidate the dictatorship. Now, where does the PNC and what kind of experience they have that will inform them on how to organize a dictatorship? They have to go back to Burnham and they have to go back to Hoyt. They have to go back to 1968 to 1985. Now, if we look at that experience, it's a horrible experience. And I don't know if they plan to do that with Guyanese. What are they going to do? Are they going to return with the KSIs, the Knowledge Sharing Institute, where they ban the 82 products and control the distribution of food, where police stations became supermarkets because the police despotically were seizing food from people who they call traders and so forth? Is that what we're going to go back to? Are we going back to, and you know, what, this is going to worsen race relations. If you put a predominantly African military and a predominantly African police force on the streets of Guyana to oppose other ethnic groups, what are you doing? What kind of fear are you putting in the minds and stereotypes about Afro-Guyanese?
But
Afro-Guyanese were in the vanguard of education. When I think of Afro-Guyanese, I think that my school teacher was an Afro-Guyanese. I think of Afro-Guyanese being in the vanguard of education. Look, I teach at a Black university. You know, I wrote a book about the Black Union here in America. My friend Floyd is a very successful Black person. I don't have references of Black people in that way. Black people are now in the streets of America fighting for freedom and the universal quest for freedom. So why are they distorting who the Afro-Guyanese is? I don't think they're very good representatives. And I tell you this, if they go in a dictatorship and mess up Guyana, there's going to be a big vacuum in the Afro-Guyanese community for leadership. That's how Walter Rodney appeared. That is how I was able to get support in Linden among Afro-Guyanese. They were disillusioned with the Burnham and the PNC dictatorship. Let me tell you what Burnham did to Afro-Guyanese. And I asked myself the question, and I don't want to carry it to any length. Did Afro-Guyanese suffer more under the PNC or under the PPP? Let me talk about under the PNC. Burnham took the Afro-Guyanese youth and he built up military and paramilitary forces, about 12. And he put them in the bush all day, all night to march, left, right, left, forward march, building their muscles and not their brains. That was anti-African. Those young people should have been in schools being educated. They should have been given loans to go and do business and that kind of thing. Look, in the 80s, I am the one that wrote the opposition and asked them, because they didn't want to work with me because them were Marxist-Leninists. And after they saw that I did well in the 85 election, I wrote them a letter, both the WP and the PPP, and sent a delegation, that we should have a united front and that we should have a concessions candidate. I had suggested Bishop George. I didn't get support for it. But anyhow, I spoke to Dr. Jagan, and neither WPA or the PPP had supported Bishop George. Dr. Jagan said, Paul, I went to speak to Bishop George, which is true. He did go with Faisal Baksh from the DLM. And he said, George is not really interested. So I said, Doc, give me 48 hours. I will go out there and try and find Afro-Guyanese who will accept. And I went searching, myself and the vice president of the DLM. And I met the former Lord Mayor of Georgetown, Afro-Guyanese. You know what he told me? He said, Paul, I'm old now, I can't go. Because he was known as a very outspoken person. I thought he would be a good candidate. I said, please recommend to me an Afro-Guyanese that I could take back to the PCD. And you know what he told me? He said, Paul, you should have come 20 years ago. Burnham has destroyed our people. He said, I could have given you a head teacher. I could have given you a local government leader. I could have given you a professional lawyer, doctor. He destroyed us. Our people are running away. And that's true. I have documented of top Afro-Guyanese who came back to work with the PNC, and they had to catch planes to get away. I have a long list of them. One of them included the brother of a former minister, Phil Ridley, who was married to Hamilton Green. So, you know, the things that happened there, Afro-Guyanese got hit very hard too. Sometimes people during the 80s only speak about it. And Rodney captured that. Rodney realized that. And Rodney led that struggle that he led. And that is why he was popular with Indian youth and Afro-Guyanese, you know. So
Right.
I believe that we are going to go back unless there is a miracle. I know a lot of people are hoping, and people are saying, well, the international community will do this, will do that. But you can't base a strategy on hope alone. You have to keep hope alive. You have to keep hope alive. But you cannot base strategy on hope. The opposition has got to begin to think of what they will do, how Guyanese will help themselves and not only wait on the international community. Now, the international community are going to impose some kind of, whether it's selective sanctions or comprehensive sanctions, I don't know. But the point is that there's so much the international community can do. But the Guyanese in Guyana are going to have to save themselves too. They're going to have to show some form of resistance of what they will do and how they will fight. Now, it would be very difficult under COVID. You know, I had taken a group of my people to the Latin American Workers University in Venezuela, and we did a workshop on how you fight a dictatorship and survive. Because in the organization I was in the leadership of in Latin America, we fought all those dictatorships in South America, from Chile right on to Guatemala. And so we had a lot of experience about how you fight dictatorship, how people were fighting it. So we developed a seminar, a workshop on it. Now we're going to have to learn how to fight a dictatorship with COVID-19, because COVID-19 is a reality. But you know, one good thing that has happened for Guyana in terms of democracy, I say that we have had, for the first time in the history of Guyana, what we call a geopolitical windfall. We have never had so many international agencies, organizations, forces, from the United Nations to the OAS and the ABC countries, from Brazil and so forth, supporting verifiable, free and fair elections and democracy. Now, this is a windfall that we have to use for the development of Guyana afterwards. This is a windfall that we cannot allow to escape. Guyanese have to develop a parallel strategy to fight the dictatorship that will join up with that support to effectively bring the dictatorship to its shortest possible time. Guyana will not survive 28 years of another PNC dictatorship. And Mr. Granger will not live, or I will not live 28 years more. So how is he going to build this dictatorship? Burnham has been building a fighting force since the 60s with the help of at that time, the CIA and all kind of people. He was building, they had the X-13 plan and all that. The United Force and the PNC were engaged in the 60s in violent terrorist activity. There is no doubt about that. That's well documented. I have the document. But Burnham had a lot of experience. It took him a lot of years. 68 elections, 73. By the time Burnham got to 1980 elections, he went to Linden and told the Afro-Guyanese. And let me tell you something, Afro-Guyanese do not like the idea when they go to vote somebody, tell them they were voted for already. They take democracy seriously. I tell you, I know what I'm talking about. And they take the idea of equality very seriously. And so Burnham went to them and he said, look, I don't need your votes anymore. I win election with my brains. Now, I don't believe that Mr. Granger or any of those leaders who are leftovers from the Burnhamite era and have gone back to the Bible of Burnham. And I'm surprised that Moses Nagamutu have moved from being a Jaganite to a Burnhamite. But these things happen in life. And also Ramjatan, that they are now in that Burnhamist kind of ethos and about rigging elections. But I don't see any of them in that leadership with the capacity to build a dictatorship that can last 28 years. I think that if Guyanese organize themselves properly, and let me tell you, there are many ways of killing the cat. I always remember, here you had the British Empire. They had the British Empire. The sun could not set on the empire. And you had all these Indians. And I always used to say, how all these Indians have, as growing up, I used to read Fidel Castro and all these people and revolutionaries. I said, how these Indians allowed the British to rule them? And there are so many. And they have so much history and culture. You know why? Because the Indo-Saxons, I call them, the elite of the Indians, were collaborating with the British. But one little man took off the jacket, took off the tie. He went back from South Africa and he put on a dhoti. And he didn't go to Delhi, he went to the center of India and went into the culture of its people and came up with very simple ideas that you will dismiss. Simple ideas. One was non-cooperation with evil is a sacred duty.
Right.
I am saying to Mr. Granger, he has been in the military for many years and he's not really been in real Guyanese politics. And I am telling him that when he decides to declare himself officially dictator of Guyana, and that would be he refused to accept the elected leader based on the recount. If he does that, Guyana will go into a state of passive aggressiveness. People would be resisting in various forms. People would be inventing sabotage at the individual level and the other. You know what will go down in Guyana? There's something in economics we call productivity. You cannot develop a country, especially Guyana, with a small economically active workforce. And productivity is extremely, extremely low. Who is going to feel to wake up in the morning to go to work to contribute to the country? Who is going to work to make sacrifice? Every time a country goes into some deep trouble, the president has to go on the radio and the television and call upon the people to make sacrifice. In whose name will he make that call? How will he motivate the people? What will he tell them? You know, when we did the listening interviews in 2016, I asked the people, do you believe you'll benefit from the oil revenue? Not one single person said they would. And they were disillusioned from 2016. They began to be disillusioned with the AFC. These guys, I don't know if they did not understand politics. The first thing they did was to raise their salaries at a big, and it created in the minds of people a first impression that the people never forgot. I go with taxi drivers, and they're predominantly Afro-Guyanese taxi drivers. We love doing interviews. Academics love interviewing taxi drivers, because taxi drivers know everybody's business. And Afro-Guyanese, and they complain about the taxes. The taxes in Guyana over the last 4 years has been horrendous. And they withdrew a lot of support for poor people, pensioners and other people, school children. You know what was one of the strategic mistakes that the APNU AFC did? And they could have had that election in the bag. The PPP was smart. They had about 2,000 young Amerindians employed, about 2,000. They fired all of them. It reminded me of Iraq. When the guy went there to run Iraq, he fired the entire military of Saddam Hussein. All the Sunnis got fired.
Right.
And they became the ISIS afterwards. So there was, Mr. Granger and the PNC should be honest that they lost that election because they screwed up. They really messed up. They didn't manage their politics properly. Look, Guyanese, everybody know your business. You can't thief and people don't know. I go through the country and they identify about 5 ministers. They know which church they go to, everything, and what they steal, how much they steal, where they steal.
Right.
So it's a country where you have to be very careful, you know. Once I told a president of Guyana, and I don't want to name his name, I met him and his wife here in Washington. I said, listen, the problem of corruption, I teach government and political corruption also. I said, listen, if you build a big house in America, nobody pays attention. I said, but if suddenly you build a big house in Guyana, everybody pay attention. They wonder where you get the money from.
Right.
Where you get the money from. So we live in a small society, and the leadership of the country have got to understand that they have to be more accountable. They have to be more responsible. And you know what is the good thing about the fact that we had democracy in Guyana? I still believe that the sacrifice that all the people made over the years to bring free and fair elections to Guyana, before the 80s and so forth, people died and so fighting for freedom, Rodney and his people and all that. Dr. Joshua Ramsamy was machine gunned in front of the Cooperative Bank. People are not aware of that. I knew Vincentica, I know Nagamutu, I know Halim Majid. You know, when they were going to vote for critical support that day in 75, I went back as a student. They dropped in at my house in Robb Street. I know all these political people. I grew up in the politics. I know them. I know Burnham. I know his sister Jessie. I know boyfriend Fingal. You know, almost every cabinet member in Guyana I have met. And I have had chats with them. You know, I know Jainurine Singh, Brindley Ben. One of my good friends is Llewellyn John. When I was kidnapped, Llewellyn John is a family friend for years of my father. He went to court, and he's Afro-Guyanese, and filed a writ of habeas corpus for me to be free. He and Jainurine Singh Sr. These guys, you know, I grew up with them. And Brindley Ben, I knew him the very first time I saw him. He stopped at our home at Alness because he was interested in a plant we had in the yard. And, he was Minister of Agriculture or something. And he came in and wanted to have a thing of that. And, you know, we have a friendship for years. And while I was in Guyana, he and his family were very supportive of me, you know. Right. So this thing about race, right? And the other point I want to make is this. We have a problem of stereotypes. We have been using the British stereotypes of who's an Indian, who's an African, who's a Chinese, who's a Portuguese, etc., who's an Amerindian. Now, I have been very lucky, and I think this is why I've escaped having a Buxton worldview or a Port Morant worldview or a Linden worldview. I grew up in Bartica. I lived in James Street, Charlotte Street. I lived in Borbies. In Kilmarnock, I lived in Wim, I lived in Ulverston, Alness. I used to spend with my father summers, holidays in Wismar. So I got exposed to all the Amerindian people. You know, my sister was very sick. She was like a baby in Bartica, and she had thrush, and the doctor couldn't deal with it. Dr. Wills was a doctor, they couldn't deal with it. And my parents handed my little sister for 2 weeks to the Amerindians, and they brought her back cured. Now, if you go through all those experiences in Guyana, you have to be anti-racist. I am very offended by both Black nationalists in the context of Guyana. I say in the context of Guyana, because Black nationalism in America, where there's white supremacy, is a very different thing than Black nationalism in Guyana. I am very an Indian nationalist that also stereotype and are prejudiced. It offends me, it upsets me, because I want to stop. You know, I tell you another, because I'm writing a piece now that is called How I Became a Guyanese. Right. You know, when we were living in James Street, All Boys Town, opposite, there was a cook shop, Ali Cook Shop. And I went with the young people, the children of Ali, up the road. They had a house on stilts with a banister. And I fell over. And a man was riding his bicycle and jumped off and caught me before I hit the gutter. I had to go to the hospital and so. Is that man an African? Is he an Indian? Is he a Chinese? Is he a Portuguese? I had an injury and I had to take blood. I got blood from my uncle, Roddy Ragnar. And I got blood from an African because my blood is 0, I think. I got the common blood. So tell me something. How do we get Guyanese to to engage in a conversation about their own experiences similar to mine or better than mine that can help. We have, you know what this is all about? Healing. If you go to a therapist or a psychologist, what do they do with you? They virtually put you on a hypnosis and they try for you to go over your experiences. You do, all of us have experiences on race in Guyana that is good, bad, and ugly. Now you have to decide which one you will embrace. I would really like to have a conversation with the PNC leadership. I wish I could, so that I could really talk to them to see if I could get them to be honest and to forget to forget saying that they won the elections, because they know they didn't win the election. Come on, don't tell me Mr. Granger, such an intelligent man, wrote so many books, got into the highest ranks of the military, became the president of Guyana. Does he believe the CARICOM people will lie, the OAS will lie, the United Nations will lie, the Carter Center will lie? Why? Why would they lie? They're not a friend of Irfan Ali, whatever, you know. Why are they going to lie? So, my friend, so I believe that we have a serious problem here where we are going to have to prepare, unless there is a miracle and Mr. Granger goes to church. I'm a Catholic, so we go and make confessions, but I don't know if Mr. Granger is a Catholic, if he will go and confess and decide to put right wrong. But outside of a miracle, and he declares himself dictator, then we have to prepare. But you know what's a funny thing? I saw a document just came out of the PNC that made me laugh. It is a critique of CARICOM, and they expose all the inside story of the Secretary General of CARICOM, how he treating his workers bad, and how people there don't get a pay, and the Batak, the guy in St. Vincent, the Batak, the lady in Barbados, and so forth. But you know what they wrote at the bottom? Resistance. Who is the PNC? How are they starting a resistance movement? They're the ones that put people in the streets. They're the ones that have the poor chair in a coffin, beating her up that she's dead. It is not the opposition stronghold that somebody came out that's threatening to kill the chair of the election. The opposition is not on the street, it's the PNC on the street. What is there? They have a resistance movement against themselves? If they declare a state of emergency, they're going to declare it against who? The virus? COVID? Are they going to fight, the military going to fight COVID? And let me tell you what I'm very concerned about. And this is serious, because I have a master's on Venezuelan contemporary history. I wrote a book on Venezuela. I taught there for 2 years. I know Venezuela inside out, very, very well. I studied the border of Venezuela with Colombia, and I studied the border problem with Guyana. I studied with top Venezuela. Father Herman Gonzalez, who was on the election commission in Guyana, the commission between Venezuela and Guyana, and Pablo Ujer. They both were professors at the university. Father Gonzalez was a Catholic like myself and a Franciscan, and he studied in Oxford. And he had always told me, he said, Paul, you know, we have a border problem with your country. I remember one night as a student in '69, I went to visit him at the Casa Maria, the Foreign Office. And he took me in his room, this big room with all the maps and so forth. And I spent about 2 hours discussing about the Brazilian ruling class, the Venezuelan ruling class, and the border problem. And he said, Paul, you know, perhaps your problem in Guyana is not really us trying to take away the Essequibo. You have a bigger problem. I believe your country might implode one day with a race issue. Mm-hmm. You all have serious ethnic problems. You know, Sonny Ramphal was appointed by this government to go and make the opening statements of the border problem. You saw it, I saw it.
Yeah.
He is telling Mr. Granger that the people who have said the Commonwealth and everybody, he was former Secretary General of the Commonwealth.
Correct.
He was part of every major commission with Brandt and them at the UN. I'm not a fan of Ramphal because Ramphal in 1968 played a dirty game with Burnham and created a fictitious document called the Bira Plot, where they said the PPP and the mayor in Venezuela were planning to overthrow the government of Guyana. They did it a couple of days before the election, but that's life. People aspire to positions. Nobody is perfect. We all have, again, I'm a Catholic. We all commit sins. and you could beg forgiveness and move on. But Ramphal is saying this. Now, how is it that we have a man named Ramphal is defending our most vital interests with the border problem in a world court, and at the same time, this man is telling you that the recount has to be the basis for the new president, declaring the new president of Ghana. Can you reconcile that for me?
Very true.
Possible?
Very true, sir. Very true.
Possible?
And indeed, at some stage, we would want to discuss some of these little niches in our history because they are very interesting. And I will let you know, sir, that we on our program have also been using those phrases. Non-cooperation with evil will be is
It's
our
a sacred duty.
Yeah,
that's correct.
So, but I want to take you back to a couple of the points. And the points of contention in Guyanese politics as it is presently. And some of these people, like Mr. Moses Nagamutu, he would have been a colleague of yours in the political history of Guyana. What would make someone like a Nagamutu now, after having fought his whole life against a dictatorship, to now be supporting the creation of one, sir?
Well, I'm not a psychologist, but I know Moses very, very well. We were both born in the same village. But that goes to show you could be born in the same village. Walter Rodney used to say that Patterson, who's a famous expert on slavery and at Harvard, he said, Patterson was my schoolmate, but he's not my class ally. He was my schoolmate, but he's not my class. Right. Moses and I have been in different political parties. He's been with the PPP. And, Moses used to go and try and break up my public meetings and so forth. I fought a dictatorship below and a dictatorship above. So in Monrepo, I remember Moses was hiding at a house and he sent somebody to throw egg. But I knew he was there. And I warned him. I said, Moses, if any egg and the egg touch me, tomorrow morning, we are coming to Freedom House. And I had a group of young people. I tell you, being a leader is a hell of a thing in those days. If I had told them to go and do this, that, or the other, they would do it. So the PPP was never able, even Moses, to break up any of my public meetings. They were never able to do it. So I know Moses, and then later we started to work in the PCD. And I don't want to go into what happened there and what role he played, because I don't like personality, going to personality, but I'm writing about it, and whatever I write will be documented by evidence. Right. But Moses, the only explanation I could have is that the power, the trappings of power. Oh, I think I have a theory. Let me tell you what is. I did think about this problem, and I was looking at Moses, Ramjatan, and all of them. There is a thing in Guyanese politics that I observe. You know how I've conceptualized it? Vengeance politics. Look at the AFC. The only reason two leaders emerged in AFC, one was from the PPP, he had problems, and one was from PNC, he had problems. But they basically, when they went to the AFC, they took all the baggage of the PPP and the PNC. So you didn't really have a real new fresh party. You follow? Because people move with their baggage, right? Now, in the case of Moses, the problem is that he felt that he should have become the leader of the People's Progressive Party. And if there's anybody he hates, it's Jagdeo. And if there's anybody he hates, it's Janet Jagan. And he felt he was betrayed by the two of them. Well, no, he was more jealous of Jagdeo, hate Janet for having sidetracked him. Right? And he felt that Jagdeo should have made him foreign minister, give him a ministry or something. I don't know what the problem was, but he never got anything. And so he was bitter. And I know this from information I have, intimate with. He was bitter. His wife was bitter. He was bitter. So it's vengeance. A lot of it is vengeance. But also, when you got into the office, it's a hell of a thing. You got a nice big house. You got all the entourage of security, I think somehow he has convinced Granger that he is more vulnerable to be killed than Granger because they've given him more security than Granger. And then he has all these outriders, right? And it's a wonderful life. You know, you don't have to work. Moses has never performed in any ministry that is of significance. He has been involved in what you call making up propaganda.
Yes, he was a propaganda guy in the.
You know what made me laugh? Because I know Moses, I remember sitting in Alnes at our veranda and Moses on the street. You know, I like Moses, you know. I like Guyanese, you know, because I find him very incredible. Look, Moses was on the street, about 25 or 30 there, marching in solidarity with the people of Vietnam. He said, Paul, man, come out and join us. We got to fight imperialism. You know, Moses used to kill me about Marxism, Leninism. Then a couple of years ago, the man said he's a Christian. I said, how the hell? These guys used to persecute me. I'm not a Marxist Leninist. You know, Moses used to talk about Russia like if you believe Russia was our fatherland. Now I don't know who's the fatherland. Anyhow, so much for Moses. So I believe it's vengeance politics, and I believe it's a trapping of power. You don't have to do a lot of work. All you got to do is run the Chronicle and put propaganda in it. It's not real work, right? And he's getting older now, and he's taking care of himself. So I don't believe we should try and get one. You know, Moses don't have real power in the system there. Neither does Ramjatan. The powerful people there is Harmon and the PNC people. They're the people with the power. And Grange and them. As you said, they are symbolic, right?
Yeah,
Go ahead, Leonard. Yes, go ahead, Leonard.
Yogi, it's such a pleasure listening to Mr. Tennessee. I didn't want to stop him to ask him any questions, but I got a couple that I think the people who are listening here. You live in the Washington D.C. area, sir. What is the mood of the Guyanese Caribbean people as it regards to the current situation in Guyana? I want to hear from you, and I also want to hear from you. If you were to reach Granger tomorrow morning, what would you say to him?
Let's start with the first question. Guyanese abroad are as polarized as the Guyanese at home ethnically. They're very emotional. There are very, very few Afro-Guyanese would say that the PPP won the election or the international observers. And that brings me to another point I'd like to discuss before we go, whether international support for democracy is equivalent to foreign intervention. Because that is something that the PNC has pushed enormously, not only in Guyana and outside. I say to Guyanese, I go to New York regularly before COVID, very regularly. And I go down to Brooklyn and I go down to Queens. Brooklyn and Queens is like Enterprise and Boston. So we brought the baggage here. So we are polarized abroad. That's so much for the Guyanese. We are polarized, just at home. Indian Africa. Okay. Regarding Mr. Granger, what would I say to him? I will say, Mr. Granger, I'm a Catholic. I served at the altar. I did Mass in Latin. I went to Oxford to a Catholic residential college. I studied with nuns and priests. I said, Mr. Granger, each day I pray about 2 or 3 times. And I know the Psalms of David, lots of the Psalms of David. And I would like you to kneel down and let's pray together. But I'd like you to listen to my prayer. And I will design a prayer that will try to appeal to him in his inner soul and point out to him the disaster and the Pandora's box that he will create by declaring himself the Pharaoh of Guyana, the dictator of Guyana, because that is what he will do effectively. And hope and pray that somehow he would be moved. I met him twice, and I like him at the personal level. He looked to me like a very Guyanese guy. I even made a joke with him when he was here in Washington. He's very much liked in the military circles here in Washington. He was an adjunct professor. And I met him at a reception. I was joking with him. I said, listen, there is an elderly politician in Guyana. Once I asked him, I told him I teach government and political corruption. Why is it a man kills himself to become a minister in the government? And the old ex-minister told me, he said, Paul, it's because of the bribe. because of the women and because of the power. And Mr. Granger had a sense of humor. He said, boy, me not get that yet. You know, I think he has a sense of humor. I believe anybody with a sense of humor, if you could get close to them, you could engage in a conversation. And I would appeal to his Christianity because I see so many photos of him praying. I got a friend call me and he said, Paul, I see Granger praying. Can you tell me what he's praying for? So that is what I will do. I will even ask him to go with him to church, to pray with him at his church, kneel with him, and let's pray together for a new Guyana, a better Guyana. I will ask him not to sacrifice democracy because of racial insecurity. And I will commit to him that I will fight with him to ensure that the new government of Guyana will address the issue of racial insecurity in a serious way, address the reforms of the Constitution, make sure that the oil revenues do not only go to a small ethnic group, clique, or to just one group, but that the people of Guyana benefit, that we create a vibe. These are the kind of things that I will say to him. And, you know, but I'd love to meet him to talk to him about it.
So
I'm not afraid of anybody. I meet people all the time, you know, not only here, all over the world, powerful people. And I talk to them. I say what I think, you know, truth to power. I have no fear to truth to power.
Let's go back to some of the party structure type of thinking, sir. When APNO AFC got into power, it made the same mistake that the PPP made when it initially got into power. But the PPP, I think, corrected that mistake very quickly. That is, APNO AFC lost contact immediately. As you rightly pointed out, giving them a salary increase, they immediately divorced themselves from the grassroots, from a groundswell kind of thinking and approach. And that cost them a lot and continue to cost them up to today because, and here is where I would like to comment. There is a great disconnect. You mentioned the middle class, for example. There is a great disconnect between the people at the middle, and I don't mean middle class in terms of wealth, the intelligentsia. There is the Grange and the cabal, and there is the people that they have, a handful of persons they got to the grassroots to make the protests and make the marches. And I remember the high slow fire kind of move. Now, do you see that within short order, that the PNC can be able to re-galvanize a groundswell, sir?
When? For the dictatorship?
Well, yes.
You mean if they hold political office?
They hold political office.
No. It's not going to happen. It's not going to. I'll tell you why.
Go on.
Okay.
Go on.
Number one is when you establish a political dictatorship and you become a dictator, you have to understand that you immediately are going to go in a mode of thinking of being a paranoid person. Because you're holding people by force. You're ruling by force, right? You're depending on a military. Now, if all these, and Granger must be thinking about it, he's not foolish. I've read his books. Listen, if the international community is so overwhelming, as I call it, I'm writing a paper on it, that we have had a geopolitical windfall in terms of support international. These people, at some point, they have contacts in Guyana military. Granger is going to be worried that there may be a coup against him. You see, when you're a dictator, you always have to be paranoid. You're looking at everybody. You don't trust anybody. Burnham used to be in touch with everybody. When Hoyt came to office, a lot of people turned up at his office. And they said, I come to collect my money. He said, what work do you do? He said, we used to work with Burnham. We there by the wharf. We the spy there. You know what I mean? You have to set up a network of spying within the PNC itself. That's where it has to start. So you are going to be consumed. Then, you know, how do you go and create a policy that will only benefit one ethnic group? How do you do that in a country like Guyana? You know, so it's a difficulty being a dictatorship. But I want to say further that when you said that the salaries was one thing, the other thing that happened with them there is that they did not go back to the Guyanese people until after the no confidence motion. And they had no ideas. They didn't have any project they were working on. I don't know what they were thinking. I think Mr. Granger's style was to leave the ministers to do what they want. And, you know, and there are about 5 ministers that emerged as very corrupt. Let me give you an example, which I found very interesting. I love conversation. So we were invited to go to Tain settlement by the University of Guyana when they made us education ambassadors. And, you know, they fired me at UG, but I'm so patriotic, I still support UG. So Mr. Harmon came to speak. And for the first time, I went up to him and I shook his hand. I said, I'm Paul Tennessee. He said, oh, you're Paul Tennessee? I read so much about you, because he was the intelligence officer for the military. But then I asked him, I said, how is the revolution? And he looked at me like if he was like he didn't understand what I was saying. I understood that when the PPP was removed from office electorally in the 2015 election, the aspiration of those Guyanese who supported APNU, AFC, is that they were expecting real change.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think Mr. Harmon understood that when I spoke to him.
Right.
That they had to carry out a revolution, they had to change things.
Mm-hmm.
And they had to give a different kind of ethical and transformational leadership. I think they missed the bus. I think they thought that their idea of going into political office was to get rich.
Well, and so said, I think if that was their idea, they certainly achieved it because they promised a good life. And obviously, it's a handful that good life, right? Sir, one last thing I want to ask you at this stage. The PNC, as a political party, forget the cabal that is in charge presently, as a political party, do you see that the PNC can probably rise again as a political party, as a political force?
If they declare themselves a dictator, or if they accept the elections? Or
either. Yeah.
Okay. The PNC has to have leadership. I have recognized that. I've learned that, you know, leaders are key just as much as the grassroots and the popular masses are key. Leaders are key. A leader we saw Hitler, we saw Mussolini, we see different kinds of leaders in the world, right? Leaders make a difference, whether you jump high or jump low. Now, in the PNC, I have not perceived from my research as yet identified a younger generation of leaders with a new vision for the PNC and thing. It's the old guys with a Burnhamite vision. I think Mr. Granger is the Burnhamite, and that was his mistake. Instead of him proclaiming a new vision, a Granger vision for Guyana, he went back and he's giving them a Burnham vision. And the people he surrounded himself with, he got them to get back into the Burnhamist vision. Now, the difference with him and Jagdeo is that Jagdeo has a Jagdeo vision from even when he was in government. You know, he has his own vision. And the thing I observed in my research between PPP and PNC is Jagdeo has been training and coaching and cultivating a younger crop of leaders. I have not seen that in the PNC. As a matter of fact, I have spoken to young PNC people and they're disgruntled that they don't have space and they're not getting an opportunity and this and that and the other. Look at how the party is structured. You know, look at how the party is structured compared it to. So there is a problem there. Now, in politics, anything is possible, but a lot depends on leadership. So nobody thought that I would have gone in the politics of Guyana the way I went, or Walter Rodney would have gone in the politics in the 1940s at Chedijagan and Borno. So it's not something that you could predict. Something can happen. Somebody inside the PNC, some young person, or even outside the PNC. That's another thing I want to tell you, that the time is going to come in Guyana where a non-Afro-Guyanese might be able to go into the Afro community and give leadership if the Afro-Guyanese leaders keep falling down. And the same thing could happen in the Indian community if that happens. But somebody you have not spoken about, and I'm a bit disappointed we didn't mention. What is the destiny of the people who are neither Indian or African?
Of course.
They have a big percentage of them.
Of
The
course.
chances of them being more Guyanese in consciousness because they, I don't know if they have loyalty to either race, see themselves as part of the flock, the sheep, or what. But I think there is hope there that those people could make a difference. In Trinidad and Tobago, we say that the French Creoles on the East-West corridor makes the difference. In Guyana, the Amerindians have numbers that can make a difference. But we also have a lot of mixed people. And I've noticed that we have a number of young people emerge. They may not have gotten votes in the election, but they emerged. They were bold, they were assertive, they're articulate, they're intelligent, they're educated, of various ethnic groups. Not necessarily Indo or Afro, but some of them are Indo too, some are Afro. Right. So I don't think that is a great worry, but I think Mr. Granger he doesn't have to anoint, because it doesn't work that way. You can anoint somebody, and if they can't deliver, they will fall down.
Well, you would recall that he struggled to get even to the leadership of the PNC. There was a lot of infighting and a lot of manipulations for Granger himself to get where he was. You remember those days, Robert Corbin. You know the entire.
I 2005, I did a study for ActionAid International on the causes of poverty in Guyana. And the last person I interviewed was Mr. Granger, because I used to subscribe to his Guyana Review. And I had a very interesting conversation with him when I interviewed him about Guyana, and I went to pay up my subscription. And I never thought that he would have become the leader of the PNC. But I did know from my analysis that Mr. Corbin was not going to be successful as an alternative in the politics. I thought he wasn't the kind of leader that even the Afro-Guyanese would support. Afro-Guyanese like a leader that has a capacity for oratory. They like a top professional person. They like a person with a kind of class. They have a very, I used to say that. I said that's why Boredom got away with a lot of things. He's so flamboyant, so dramatic. You know who the Indians want? The Indians want a Mahatma Gandhi. Somebody who don't have sex, who don't thief, who don't do this, who don't do that to be the leader. So when Jagan used to go around the country and tell them that I'm a Marxist, Leninist, long live the Soviet Union, they never paid attention to that. They said, Bhaiya, you are Mahatma Gandhi. You are the head of your family. You follow what I'm getting at? In the minds of people, these ethnic groups had different perceptions. Now, Peter de Geer is a very interesting personality in the politics of Guyana. Peter de Geer was Portuguese, private enterprise. At 21 years old, he became director of his company. So we don't know who will emerge. But what I think the party should do, if they open it and it's democratic, PPP still controls their party along Marxist-Leninist structure like the Communist Party of China. You got to be a Marxist-Leninist to get up in the party. You go through a lot of stages. There's some good to it and some bad to it. The good thing is PPP remains the best organized political party in Guyana. And that's one of the reasons why they won the elections.
Right.
They are well organized. They know The funny thing is, and it's a contradiction, PPP is a Marxist-Leninist party who perfected the art of electoral politics. And, it's a kind of
perfected capitalism over the past, right?
Yeah, like for example, when I was campaigning for free and fair election, I went to London and I asked to see, and here in Washington, I asked to see the ambassador of Mauritius because I thought we had some similarities where we have a Mauritius. And I asked the ambassador, I said, Ambassador, what advice you give me to organize a political movement? He said, boy, you got to send your people to India to get trained. Because these Indians have become experts at electoral politics. Can you believe the millions and millions of people that vote in those elections? It's incredible, right? And they have been able, with a brief experience with Indira Gandhi, they have had democracy from 1947 to now. and they've had problems, but they were able to maintain the thing. So electoral politics is at the heart of the Indian community as much as the Afro-Guyanese community. Don't forget that all over Africa, people fought for freedom. All over America, people fought. African Americans give leadership for the fight for freedom. So freedom is a universal quest by all humanity. And we have to repeat that. So I believe we don't have to worry about the future of the PNC or the future of the PPP. I think what we have to worry about is the future of Guyana. And I believe that Guyana in a political dictatorship is doomed. You are going to have resistance, passive aggressive people. You're going to have people continue to leave the country. Remember in the hard days of Burnham, I had to go and campaign in Ciudad Bolivar. That's where the Guyanese were. I had to campaign in Toronto and Washington and New York. There's where the Guyanese were, right? They left. So the problem is we are less than 1 million people. We have the highest per capita in terms of relation to our population of the exportation of people who are tertiarily educated. So there's not a brain drain. There's a brain loss of a mammoth proportion. And how are you going to develop a country without people? How are you going to develop a country without skills? So a dictatorship has nothing good to offer except benefiting the people who run the dictatorship. And that is going to become very aware to the people. During the days of Burnham come up with all kinds of slogans. He said, well, now, brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen, we have to all call ourselves comrades. He virtually legislate that you have to wear a shirjak and you have to call each other comrades. But the wisdom of the grassroots, what they said? They said, Baya, we got little comrade, and we got medium comrade, and we got big comrade.
Thank you.
So I'm getting at the grassroots wisdom. I got a speech by Walter Rodney. Walter Rodney said, and it's going to be in one of my chapters. Walter Rodney said that I love Caribbean politics in the street. Walter Rodney said that wisdom from the grassroots. A lady at a public meeting said that Burnham could make Satan cry. I tell you, that grassroots don't believe that you could get away with murder with them. You might do it for a day, you might do it for a month, you might do it for a week. But they're going to find ways they're going to see through it. Afro-Guyanese are not going to benefit from a dictatorship. How are they going to benefit? We need all the other ethnic groups with the Afro-Guyanese together to create wealth in the country. Indeed. So how are you going to do it? How are you going to do it? Like COVID. So are you going to just give the COVID, only Afros going to wear masks, or everybody got to wear a mask?
Well, indeed. And therein lies what we have to dissect and continue to discuss in the future, sir. Exactly how do we shape our country going forward? Because one of the next conversations I would certainly hope to have you as part of in the near future is exactly that. How do we shape a country going forward? How do we recover from this current, and how do we ensure that this never happens again by that reshaping? Mr. Tennessee, it's been quite a pleasure to have you here tonight, sir. Unfortunately, we are at program time, and we would have to close the program in short order. But sir, just before we leave, I'll certainly deflect back to you for your closing thoughts. And before we do that, though, let me say thank you. It's been a pleasure to have you here tonight, and we will look forward to a continued discourse with you in the near future, sir. But over to you for 2 minutes of your closing thoughts.
And Azzy, on that, Yogi, if I may, I can't allow him to go without asking him this. So it's been a pleasure. But how bad or how big a damage has been done to our people because of this political situation? Do you have any idea?
Yes, it's enormous because it's in the middle of COVID. COVID threatened us existentially, not as a race, but as a human, not as an Indo race or Afro race, but as a human race. And in the middle of that stress and fear that you may not live tomorrow, you wake up in the morning and you don't know if you will live. you have this problem of political polarization along racial lines, and you have a tremendous instability in the country where we don't know if we have a government and when we will have a government. And so for the people of Guyana, this is added stress. Any psychologist or psychiatrist will tell you that. This is normal. You don't need a rocket science to be a rocket scientist
Right.
to
Right.
think on that. But my closing thought would be this. Guyana is very polarized, and we have, whether Mr. Granger declares himself dictator or whether he has decided that he will be honest and put on the table the ethnic fears that he claims that African people have. Okay, he says he's speaking for them. If he and Mr. Harmon and them would put it on the table and stop telling lies that they have won the election based on Mingo and Lowenfield's numbers, if he could do that, then the healing process could begin. If he declares himself dictator, the healing process we wouldn't be able to deal with the healing process of Guyana. And Guyana is a nation state that we have to be in a project of nation building. And we have postponed it. Not every time we have postponed it. We have really sat down as a people and really worked out how we are going to build this nation. And this is the biggest challenge we have, but it comes down to ethical and transformational leadership. And I hope somehow that this leadership would somehow appear in the country and that we will not go into a dictatorship. That is my major concern. And my last reflection is that I'd like to say to the Guyanese people that it is not true that international solidarity for free and fair elections is equivalent to foreign intervention. Foreign intervention is when your country is invaded, like we were invaded in 1953 and our government was overthrown. But since then, we have all the people who have come to our country to look at our elections were invited by the government of the day. Believe it or not, Guyanese.
Correct.
But Mr. Granger invited all those people that they're telling you now are foreign invaders.
Correct.
He invited them because he wanted to prove to the world that he was a Democrat, and that is verified by CARICOM, by OAS, by Commonwealth, by the United Nations, by Carter Center, and by all Guyanese at home. Anybody who wants to be a leader and would like to be democratically elected, not a person who has been pushed upon the people. So I hope that I hope I could get an opportunity to speak to the PNC leadership or to Mr. Granger himself, but I don't know how that's possible. I'd be willing to risk going into Guyana and buy my own ticket, but I don't know if he will receive me. If you could work on it, I'll be happy. I'd love to play a mediator role. As I told you, I'll go pray with him. I got a lot of David Psalms that I think can move him. If King David of the Old Testament can't move Granger, then I don't think Mahadeo and the others are going to be able to do it.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. And we certainly will continue working on that and working on all kinds of discussions that we can have with everybody. It is Friday evening, ladies and gentlemen, and I want to let you know how thankful we are to Mr. Paul Nehru, Tennessee, for being here with us tonight. It's been a pleasure to have you, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, let me also tell you that our invitation remains open. I wish to re-announce an open invitation for any person, one or two, any person or persons from APNU AFC to join room 592 on your claims of fraud in these elections. I make a public invitation for one or two persons, let me repeat, from APNU AFC to come in room 592 to discuss your claim of fraud in these elections. Number two, I also am hoping to start in short order an open discussion, a very open discussion on those extrajudicial killing that seems to be haunting a lot of persons and a lot of our psyche. We need to have more and more open discussions in this country. And three, I'm really hoping we can put these elections behind us and bring back people like Mr. Tennessee to start having an open discussion on race. We need to discuss these. We need to ensure that the political opportunists do not continue to define the nation because of their political expediency. We have to rise as a nation. So, ladies and gentlemen, I wish to remind you that we remain open and we will be seeing you back on Monday evening in room 592 and Monday at 1:30 on COVID Watch and Elections Watch with Mr. Leonard Gildarie. Leonard, unless I guess something else comes up, then we certainly will be dropping in on you on the weekends as we normally do. If we have breaking news and we have issues that needs to be discussed, ladies and gentlemen, know for sure that Mr. Gildarie and yours truly will be here either during the day or in the night to bring you those discussions. But for now, have a great weekend, ladies and gentlemen. Stay safe and remember, do not fall prey to any hate politics. Do not fall prey to any calls to bring you out of your home to join any kind of protest, legal or illegal. And ladies and gentlemen, the APNU AFC, they are planning to breach the laws because they have announced that they're going to have public meetings in various areas. I will ask you, if they are bringing hampers, go and collect your hampers. But if they have no food to give you, if they have no help to give you, then don't go and listen to the poisonous talk. We have no place for that in a society that will rise to look out for each other. It has been a pleasure to have you here again, Mr. Paul Nehru, Tennessee. Pleasure has been ours, and we certainly are delighted that you remain as eager to educate Guyanese and to continue to have dialogue and debate with us to ensure that we can have an educated population going to the future, sir. And we'll certainly look forward to inviting you again in the near future. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been a pleasure to have you here in room 592. As I said, it's Friday evening. Do have a warm and great weekend ahead of you. Stay safe. Remember, continue doing a prayer for Guyana. This is still the most beautiful country in all of God's given earth. Go to church virtually, but do your prayers. Stay safe. Stay well. Bye-bye now.